This is Christopher Parham, also known as Ice Cube 57 on the Endless Fair Forum, and today I wanted to talk about how much power you should actually have on an electric bike. I know that we can get these powerful controllers and dump a lot of power into motors and everything, but is it really necessary? And the thing that the reason why I bring this up is because. Um, I've been recently, I guess, going on business pleasure trips. I've been seeing a guy down in Savannah, Georgia. He owns or manages a bike shop down there, and so we've been kind of going on these small group rides or nightly rides or whatever. And and I'm like, I have a very, very aggressive, bike. It does 45 miles an hour. It's running 18S, 66 volts, 32 amp hour battery. I have an 80 amp controller. It's tuned to 80 battery amps, 160 phase amps. And I also have a psychoanalyst intervening with the throttle ramping and controlling how much wattage or amperage, that goes into the motor. I have three different speed settings. One is legal. Basically, it's limited to 1,000 watts and 20 miles an hour. My next setting is limited to 3,000 watts, um, but no real amperage limit. And then I have the next one is unlimited. Well, I have where I have unlimited amperage. It can take advantage of the full 80 some odd amps of the controller, no speed limit, and no wattage limit. So the first time I went down there about a month ago, um, I was overheating a lot, and I was riding really aggressively, and I was staying in the unlimited speed setting. And this is a flat city, so the motor should be reaching its top speed, and the efficiency should be, quite well, um, but still getting, overheating scenarios where the psychoanalyst was pulling the power back due to the thermal throttling set up on it. And so this is a really busy city, so you kind of have jackrabbit starts or a lot of stop and go traffic. And one thing that after being on that trip, I started, thinking about how to overcome this, or like, one, why am I overheating? Because I have a vented motor, I have the psychoanalyst and everything, and the motor should have enough heat sinking capability to ward this off, for a good while, but I'm just not seeing that. And so, I started taking a look at, my settings on my psychoanalyst. And one thing about the unlimited setting that I have on my psychoanalyst, the ramping is near instant. So it's like full power off the line. So it's nice to have that when you have those jackrabbit starts and you need to get out in front of traffic, or take the lane, like you pull up next to a car, the light turns green, and you haul ass off, and get in front of the car and get some distance in between. That's what I mean by jackrabbit starts. So it's dumping a lot of power to launch you off the line and get up to speed, um, just to hit another light. So, and the motor doesn't have enough time to get up to its efficient speed. And then since I have air cooling, there's not enough time for the air to get in there and cool the motor off to drop the temperature back down to, I wouldn't even say there was a temperature rise, but you keep on doing jackrabbit starts and dumping power into the motor without it getting up to speed and without it stirring or moving air, inside the motor. So it's a snowball effect, and the motor eventually gets hot. So on the second trip, what I've done is I changed the throttle ramping on all of my settings. Like, well, the 20 mile per hour setting, the legal setting, I really don't have to worry about that. The motor has enough torque and acceleration where it gets up to 20 miles per hour rather quickly. So, I'm not really worried about that setting. The the medium setting, which, like I said, I have it set for 3,000 watts max because I have a Muxus 3,000 watt motor. So I was, created this setting in mind to keep the motor in a continuous wattage state so that, more likely it wouldn't overheat in the setting and I can, maintain a decent speed. Before I had it limited, I really had the speed limit set it limited to 3,000 watts and 30 miles per hour, but I realized that was kind of sandbagging a little bit. So I removed the wattage. No, I removed the mile per hour cap, but still kept the 3,000 watt setting. And so on this visit, and then, but going back to the ramping, uh, if you go into your psychoanalyst settings and you actually uh, putting your throttle through the psychoanalyst and then the psychoanalyst to the controller, it can control the ramping, meaning if you twist the throttle, uh, the psychoanalyst will interpret that and then sort of like re-encode it and then send it to the controller. So I have mine on a on 0.4 volts, meaning the voltage of the throttle, you can move it wide open, and I think wide open is around 3.5 some odd volts or something, but it will take, when it's set at 0.4 volts, that means the throttle will rise 0.4 volts a second. So this controls your launch. And so, one, it's a predictable launch to where one, you're not creating so much force in the dropouts, because like if you didn't have the psychoanalyst and you pop the throttle, you put in like a ton of instant torque on the dropouts, which enough of that will cause the dropouts to break if you don't have a strong torque on. So I kept that in mind, that I need to kind of keep the ramping a little bit more conservative, one, to save the dropouts of the bike and ease the stress on the torque arms. But also when you have no launch control, it can be really, really dangerous, because one thing is, especially if you're cruising and you start out at a light, and let's say you had one hand on the handlebar and you went to go not goose the throttle, but just even engage the throttle, there's a sudden surge of power that can cause the bike to kind of get away from you. So what this throttle ramping does, it creates like a soft start. But the thing is, it's not such a soft start to where, oh my God, that I don't have that power to get off the line and still hang in traffic or take the lane or whatever. It's just more predictable, and it's not such a joke like the bike is trying to pull away from you. It's just nice and progressive as you accelerate. What this also does is, like I said, since I have the setting that is um, limiting it to 3,000 watts, so off the line, not only is the ramping slow and it's not really giving the bike full power, um, you know, due to it engaging the throttle real slow, but there's also that 3,000 watt capping. So even in this flat city that I'm in, I can still almost get that sensation that I have a super bike, even though I'm um, limiting the throttle ramping to have a more predictable, slow engagement. But also the 3,000 watt limit really isn't limiting me that much, because I'm still able to get off the line and out accelerate cars. But also the positive thing about that is, uh, at cruising speed, um, at cruising speed of 45 miles an hour, which is the top speed of my bike only sips 3,000 watts. So other than it being slightly longer to get up to top speed, I'm also staying within the wattage limits of the motor. So on this trip, I found myself in my medium 3,000 watt setting a lot more, and I was getting nowhere near the thermal limits of the motor. It was staying around like 50, 60, 70 C when I was riding, versus if I was in my unlimited mode, I was just hanging over 100, 110, 120, and that's when the thermal throttling was kicking in and limiting me because the motor was hot. So I think that, with the 3-speed settings, it's definitely helped me manage the heat a lot better, because like on this trip, other than me needing to like punch it to get out of a situation, all I have my switches on my handlebar, so all I got to do is flip it to unlimited to get out of that situation, or pass a call, or do something really quick, and then I'm dropping it back down to the medium setting, because like I said, I'm finding that the medium 3000-watt setting has enough punch and enough power to accelerate me and get me up to top speed without dumping a whole lot of power into the motor. Because one of the things that I definitely notice is the power to weight ratio on these bikes is very, very, there's a huge gap. It's a very light bike, but it has a lot of power. So, when you're on this unlimited speed setting, you're accelerating so fast that you really can't react to, people can't judge how fast you're going, so they pull out in front of you. So you tend to have people pulling out in front of you, and then you have to slow down the bike and then build your speed back up. So that's another thing, that's another wasteful aspect of, you riding in a high powered setting all the time. You're dumping a lot of power to get that acceleration just to have to hit the brakes, and then dump a lot of power back into the motor just to get back up to speed, because, somebody cut you off. But if you're riding in a continuous wattage setting where you still get that same feel, but you're not wasting all that power, dumping it into the motor and heating it up, that's that does a lot for your efficiency and how much waste heat you generate. Because just think, if you're on a limited setting and you're doing these jackrabbit starts, when you're accelerating, the efficiency of the motor is very, very low. So like in my case, I'm dumping 6,000 watts into the motor, and as it's climbing, the efficiency sucks until it gets to top speed. So all the energy that you're dumping into the motor, part of that, or a good portion of that, is being turned into waste heat until it gets the RPMs up to top speed. So you're wasting a lot of power. So if you limit the wattage going into the motor and can deal with a 1 to 2 second delay in your launch, and a 1 to 2 second delay up to top speed, it will save a lot of waste heat that you're generating with the jackrabbit starts. But one thing, here is another aspect to look at. Look at it. Like I said, I had the throttle ramping at point 0.4. Like I said, it's increasing 0.4 volts a second. So, like I said, it's giving this predictable ramping where you can control the bike quite easily, and it feels a lot safer. But like I said, off the line, it sort of feels like turbo lag. So you twist the throttle, the bike goes, and like for the first 1 or 2 seconds, it's slow and gradual, and then it ramps up quite, I wouldn't say quite dramatically. It's still predictable, but it ramps up quite quickly. And like I said, you can still take the lane, but like I said, there's like a turbo lag. Like if you're in a car and you don't rev up the motor to get the turbo going, you have a turbo lag. So if you go to punch it and you have a turbo, it's going to be anemic for the first few seconds, and then that turbo spools up, and then all of a sudden there's this surge of acceleration. So it's the same thing with the bike. When I have the setting at point 0.4, it's like me and the car are pretty much neck and neck off the line for the first 1 or 2 seconds, and then all of a sudden there's this surge of power where I can take the lane and pull away from the car. So it's being a lot more smarter, a lot more efficient, and it's not putting you in a dangerous situation. You can still ride in traffic, be aggressive and everything, but you're not wasting all the power as if you just had no cycle analyst at all and no throttle ramping to keep the wattage and the wattage in check, or your amperage in check. So I see a lot of people building these high powered bikes, and they're not spending that extra money to put a temp sensor in the motor, or they're not spending the extra money to get a psychoanalyst V3 to do all of these control mechanisms. Because whenever I first bought whenever I first got an e-bikes, I was the one that was getting standalone psychoanalysts, or getting the psychoanalyst V2, V2.3 or whatever, that wasn't as smart as the V3. But once I got the V3, I stopped burning up motors. My temperature, always stayed in control. My motor windings always stayed nice and pristine. They never started, smoking or turning black or anything. The psychoanalyst is definitely a must-have tool for high-powered bikes, and you really have to, over the years, I've, been a lot observant over the motors and the characteristics and what works and what doesn't. And so I'm still learning things. But my two trips down to the shop, in the city, like I said, the city is perfectly flat, and that's why I'm like, I would love to get in the city and ride around, and not really see what my bike can do, because I already know what it can do in Atlanta, but Atlanta isn't flat. This city is flat, and so it was interesting to see my first visit where I'm like really really aggressive, and not that I have to pull over to because I'm overheating, but I was just baffled, like, why I'm having this issue in a flat city, to the second visit where I rethought all of my settings and everything, and it was a much better result. And even like I said, I'm realizing I don't need as much power as I once did before. And I remember there was a time on this trip where um, there was this like Kawasaki, not Kawasaki, it was like one of those 150cc, 200cc type motorcycles. It was an older 70s, 80s model, and this dude had his girlfriend on the back. And so um, we were down in Tybee Island, Georgia, and so they have a flat straightaway, and so he was behind me, and I kind of sped up to see what he would do, and then so we started, I wouldn't say racing, but we started playing, chasing each other. And so I'm realizing, that's when I realized that, like I said, that medium speed setting, I was, even though this bike has a higher top speed, I was keeping up with this guy up to the speed limit of my bike of 45 miles per hour. One is the speed zone was 35, so we were already breaking the law. But I was able to keep up with him at 45 miles an hour in my medium speed setting. Still had good acceleration. Still able to achieve my top speed, and not waste all this power, with the Jackrabbit stars. And then I'm looking at my temps, and my temps are like perfect. They're, like I said, that 3,000 watt number for the motor, that does lend some truth to it. It can take that 3,000 watt continuous, and that's all that it needs to maintain top speed. So that works out great. So that also comes into play when you check your motor windings. If your top speed isn't, the wattage draw at your top speed, if it doesn't fall within the continuous specs of the motor, then yeah, you're gonna have an issue with overheating. If you're doing 45 miles an hour and you need 5,000-6,000 watts to do that, yes, you're gonna overheat the motor. But if you're doing 45 miles an hour and you're only pulling 3,000 watts, and you can pretty much do that almost continuously without getting the motor critical. So that's why you have to match your motor turns to your attendant top speed, and make sure that you under the continuous wattage limit of the motor, um, and that will avoid you burning up your motor. So in this situation, in a flat city, this four-turn motor can do 45 miles per hour continuously without overheating. But if I take this back home where I have a lot of hills and stuff, and I'm needing a lot of power, 5,000-6,000 watts to get through these hills and terrain and everything, yes, I'm going to overheat this motor faster, so I possibly need to go down to a lower turn motor, what they call it, volt up, amp down, so, I have a 4-turn Muxes to really ride efficiently at my house. I really need a 5-turn Muxes and go to 24S and drop the amperage down to really maintain the efficiency and try to stay within that 3,000 watt limit to where I can have more continuous duty in my terrain. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and keep this short. But that's my perspective on do you really need that much power? Like I said, it's nice to have a 5,000 watt bike, a 10,000 watt bike, but do you really need it? Because when it boils down to it, you don't need that much power to maintain your top speed. And I'm a heavy guy, and like I said, I found that 3,000 watts was adequate to get me up to my top speed, and it was still adequate enough to uh, still outpace traffic and take the lane when I need it. But you have to play around with your throttle ramping. If your throttle ramping is instant to where it's like the cycle analyst isn't even there, then you're not really using the cycle analyst efficiently for launch control. But if you put it around maybe zero point 0.4, 0.5, you can still take advantage of it not saturating the motor unnecessarily, and you still have good launches, and it's not wasting a lot of power during the acceleration. So, um, but yeah, again, my name is Ice Cube 57 on the Illustrator Forum, and like I said, this is just a few little words for thought.